By the end of June 1940, Britain stood alone, toe-to-toe with the Nazi hordes across the Channel. Well, I say alone, but you know what I mean. Thankfully, half a decade before, a new British fighter had gone into production. It was beautiful, agile, easy to fly, and a fantastic gun platform. It was to give more than one German a dose of Knallerkrankheit. In the hands of British and Commonwealth pilots, it would secure the beleaguered island its future. Oh, and they also had something called the Spitfire? The Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Vickers Spitfire have been on most of our lips since we were kiddywinks. No doubt you've chosen your camp just like me. We also know that during the Battle of Britain, these two fighters had distinct roles and methods in which they were used within the Dowding system. At least that's what I thought until very recently. Apparently I've been thinking about this all wrong for years. Forgetting the arguments over which aircraft made the most significant contribution to the British victory over Operation Sea Lion, there is one tenet of the battle we all know by heart. Ask yourself, if you were sitting in a Hurricane in 1940, what would you expect to see in your gun sight? And what if you were in a Spit? Of course, I'm talking about the often quoted statement in the comments, the Hurricanes went after the bombers, and the Spitfires shot down those sneaky snappers. Well, hey, it's not wrong to say that, but it's not entirely correct either, as I recently discovered. At the moment, I'm trying to read as many autobiographies of combat pilots as I can, and it was while reading Al Deer's 9 Lives that I had a light bulb moment and started researching a new question. During the Battle of Britain, did Hurricanes really only target bombers while Spitfires tended to target fighters? Well, of course not. We both know that aerial combat is messy, and whoever had the height at the start of an action dictated its terms. Defending British fighters were often jumped on the climb and had to fight off Me-109s and 110s. But back in the control rooms, with pretty waffs pushing plots over the map, was this the ultimate aim? So here are some interesting figures. When we look at claims made by Hurricanes and Spitfires, against all bombers, Hurricanes claimed 63% of the destroyed claims. Against fighters, it was 53%. And when looking specifically at 109s, it's 47%. So if we subscribe to this idea that Hurricanes shouldn't even be messing with 109s, why are those numbers so high? In his book, Al Deer, a New Zealander, describes one of his many scrambles with 54 Squadron, saying the following, and I promise I won't try the accent this time. 70 plus aircraft now in mid-channel. Should make landfall between Dungeness and Dover. You are to engage the escort fighters. Is this understood? Hornet leader to control. Understood. That's a new one, I thought. The first time we've been given specific orders to engage the escort fighters. Must inquire when I get down what it's all about. Later in the chapter, Deer goes on to say, what was the significance of that order yesterday about going for escort fighters? As a matter of fact, it was the same again today. Apparently, the AOC has decided to draw off the escort fighters by detailing selected Spitfire squadrons to this specific task. The remaining Spitfire squadrons and Hurricanes can then get a better crack at the bombers. This was the passage that intrigued me. Firstly, when did this order occur? Secondly, what did Deer's interlocutor mean by selected squadrons? I mean, we all know that every Spitfire was directed towards the escort whenever possible, right?
For Christ's sake, Coslin, wake up, will you?
Wrong. The reality was that the Dowding system, though revolutionary for its time, had its limitations. The warning time of incoming raids was limited. In a bid to save pilots from fatigue and to economise on fuel and aircraft maintenance, fighters were kept on the ground until needed. This often resulted in squadrons being scrambled too late and having to attack enemy formations from unfavourable positions. When it worked, British defenders could be positioned correctly and then choose when and where to intercept German raids. It was only at these times that specific fighter types could be directed against specific enemy aircraft. More often than not, especially in the battle's early stages, single squadron commanders would be leading no more than 11 other fighters to intercept hundreds of German intruders. In these cases, the most he could do was to send a section of 3 or more Hurricanes or Spitfires to keep the bloody 109s off the tails of the remaining 2 sections who attacked the bombers.
Yellow section, keep your eyes peeled for the escort.
This is to say that for most of the Battle of Britain, RAF pilots couldn't be picky over who they fought. Also, as Deer refers to, it seems that only selected Spitfire squadrons were given the role of specifically engaging German high-cover Me-109s. The fact that Deer is talking about it is significant, as number 54 Squadron was then flying out to Hornchurch, as well as Manston. And of course, that means number 11 Group. And there we have it. The truth is that when we parrot the tenet that Hurricanes generally shot down bombers, while Spits preferred 109 meat, we are unconsciously referring to number 11 Group. The policy, of which there certainly was one, was the brainchild of Keith Park, another Kiwi, who is the main reason I don't speak better German today. Dankeschön. This is to say that, to the best of my knowledge, no such similar policy was followed in number 10 Group, though they eagerly cooperated with their 11 Group neighbours, nor was it a policy in number 12 Group, who were less eager to follow Park's instructions. Number 13 Group is slightly irrelevant here because long-range Me-110s didn't pose quite the same danger as the nimble 109s over Kent. So when exactly did Air Vice Marshal Park develop his inspired use of Spitfire squadrons, and what did it entail? The source for this comes from a series of instructions Keith Park issued to his group and sector controllers over the course of the battle. They demonstrate that he was flexible in his tactics, often responding to new developments at the right time. The orders also clearly show that the Dowding system's biggest weakness were the men and women who worked within it. Park often needed to reinforce what he'd previously said and deliver a bollocking or two over those crucial months. The first mention of specifically dealing with the escort fighters beyond a unit-to-unit basis came at the beginning of the second phase of the Battle of Britain. During what is known as the Kanalkampf by the Germans, number 11 Group squadrons generally carried out the same sort of jobs, convoy patrols, each with the same objective.
Leave the flaming fighters. It's the bloody bombers we want.
On the 13th of August, the Luftwaffe launched Unternehmen Adler Angriff. RAF bases and the RAF itself replaced shipping as the main objective of the German onslaught. 6 days later, Park issued a memo to his controllers laying out his new orders. In point D, he says, against mass attacks coming inland, dispatch a minimum number of squadrons to engage enemy fighters. Our main objective is to engage enemy bombers, particularly those approaching under the lowest cloud layer. This indicates the beginning of the policy on paper, but as it clearly says, it wasn't to be all and only Spitfire squadrons sent against the enemy fighters, but just enough to give the rest of the 11 Group a chance with the bombers. The role of high cover patrol, which was to protect against high-flying Me-109s, generally fell to the Hornchurch-based Spitfire squadrons, of which number 54 was one. During August, there were rarely more than 3 Spitfire squadrons at this airfield and its satellites. Just over 2.5 weeks later, on the 5th of September, Park issued another instruction. In it, we start to see his policy of sending a pair of squadrons in against raids, rather than trying to organise mass formation attacks, as were championed elsewhere. The instructions said, 5. The enemy's main attack must be met in maximum strength between the coast and our line of sector aerodromes. Whenever time permits, squadrons are to be put into the battle in pairs. Some Spitfire squadrons are to be detailed to engage the enemy fighter screen at 20,000 or more feet. The Hurricanes, because of their inferior performance, should normally be put in against the enemy bombers, which are rarely above 16,000 feet by day. So again, we have a reference to a specific role for the Spitfires and Hurricanes. Nevertheless, the order clearly says some rather than all Spitfires. On the date of this order, number 11 Group had 5 Spitfire squadrons, 3 based at Hornchurch and 1 each at Croydon and Kenley. 3 times as many Hurricane squadrons were also operational that day. Subsequent instructions to his sector controllers really highlight why the notion that Spitfires only really engaged fighters and their counterparts only really engaged the bombers is flawed. I will also highlight this with other data later in the video. In his memo dated the 7th of September 1940, Park says the following. From reports by RAF personnel at aerodromes, also from AA gun stations, and lastly from our own fighter formations, it is evident that during the past week, some enemy bomber formations have proceeded uninterrupted to their inland objectives. This has happened on numerous occasions when we have had from 12 to 20 squadrons dispatched to intercept and to cover aerodromes. The reason is mainly that our fighters are patrolling so high that they are normally becoming heavily engaged with the enemy fighter screen, flying above 20,000 feet. On one occasion yesterday, only 7 out of 18 squadrons dispatched engaged the enemy. On another occasion on the same day, 7 out of 17 squadrons engaged the enemy. It is obvious that some of our controllers are ordering squadrons intended to engage bombers to patrol too high. When Group orders a squadron to 16,000 feet, sector controllers, in their superior knowledge, adds 1 or 2,000, and the squadron adds another 2,000 in the vain hope that they will not have any fighters above them. The net result has been that daily, some of the enemy bomber formations slip in under 15,000 feet, frequently without any fighter escort, and bomb their objectives, doing serious damage, as at Brooklands. In fact, the majority of the enemy bomber formations have only been intercepted after they had dropped their bombs and are on the way out. This document tells us two things. Firstly, the downing system only worked when there was good cooperation between observers, controllers and pilots, importantly with the latter trusting the former.
Patrol north wheeled.
Hello, buddy, that's no good to me. I'm turning west, climbing up some. Over.
The instruction also tells us that the policy of using Spitfires to keep fighters off other attacking RAF units wasn't established enough, or if it was, not effective at this point. Seemingly, every squadron commander was operating under the assumption that his own unit would need to deal with the escort and bombers. Thus, he needed crucial height to be able to do it.
It's like shooting rats in a barrel.
You'll be in a barrel if you don't watch out for the fighters.
Over the last 28 days, just 8% of you watching this channel are subscribed. So if you like what you see and you really want to support me, the best way to do that is to hit the subscribe button, share my videos and leave a comment. I'm really trying to get this channel up to 60,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I could do with your help to do that. Back to the video now. 4 days later, Park issued another memo. The situation had again changed. The Luftwaffe had stopped sending separate attacks of 200 or 300 aircraft against Britain during a single day, opting for shorter but more concentrated attacks. Over 45 minutes to an hour, the RAF might need to engage the same number of aircraft spread over 2 to 3 waves. Often the first wave consisted of a high-altitude German fighter screen. Again, Keith Park and his team were quick to identify the change in tactics and come up with a strategy to counter the new threat. By this point in the battle, Park clearly favoured sending squadrons in pairs to intercept the initial enemy attack, and preferably pairs of the same type of fighter. When the first wave of a mass German raid was plotted, those squadrons at readiness would be sent off in pairs to intercept them. Here, Spitfires are specifically mentioned as being used against the German fighter screen. Hurricanes are also clearly detailed to attack bombers, but also the close escorting Me-109s and 110s. When it came to the subsequent bomber-heavy raids expected to follow this fighter-dominated initial wave, no mention of specific enemy targets is repeated. So, if we look at the order of battle for the 11th of September specifically, Fighter Command boasted 53 operational Spitfire and Hurricane squadrons, 38% of which, some 20 squadrons, were directly under Keith Park's control. The point I'm trying to make is that only just over a third of all RAF fighters on that day were being subjected to the rule Spits go after snappers and Hurries shoot down the bombers. In fact, it would appear again that this wasn't happening in practice. On the same day that Park issued number 11 group instructions to controllers, number 16, he issued number 18 too. In this memo, the 11 group AOC was trying to fix many of the shortcomings with the tactics he'd earlier laid out. The most significant point for this discussion is that still by the 11th of September, RAF fighters were not targeting the right type of enemy aircraft, as popular history would have us believe. Very high raids of between 100 and 150 fighters being allowed to draw up nearly all the group prematurely. The bomb raids then approaching about 45 minutes later when a number of our squadrons are on the ground refueling. So while it may be true Hurricanes were being sent out with designs on bombers and slower and lower flying escorts, they were invariably tangling with this Spitfire's meat instead. The same memo issued fresh instructions saying, very high enemy fighters. 2. The Spitfire squadrons of Hornchurch and Biggin Hill are, in clear weather, to be detailed in pairs to attack the high fighter screen, which is normally between 25,000 and 30,000 feet. Diversions by enemy fighters. 5. If it appears that the first wave of raids are high-flying fighters, act as follows. 1. Detail not less than several pairs of Spitfires to fighter screen. 2. Get ample Hurricane squadrons rendezvoused in pairs in the region of sector aerodromes. 3. Get Northolt and Tangmere squadrons to readiness in dispatch as wings of 3 squadrons to intercept the enemy's second or third wave, which normally contains bombers. Again, it seems that these are the orders that cemented the idea in most of our minds that the majority of Spitfires and Hurricanes had specific roles during the Battle of Britain. However, just 2.5 weeks later, on the 28th of September, it seems that the situation had changed yet again. Number 11 Group Instructions to Controllers Number 20, issued on the 28th of September, reminds controllers not to forget instructions for heavy attacks using high fighter screens issued on the 11th. Nevertheless, the same document mentioned that changes in the weather are making these types of raids less and less likely. With cloud cover making high fighter sweeps less and less effective, there were no specific orders for Spitfires to target only German fighters in these scenarios. Interestingly, it's in this memo that Park mentions wing formations, ultimately favouring 2 squadron attacks over 3 or more squadrons being in a wing. Take that, Douglas. By the 4th of October, the tactics of the enemy had again changed. In a memo issued on that date, Park discusses the new use of a special Spitfire flight that would be used to gather information about incoming attacks from the air. It also refers to the new tip and run raids being mounted by ME-110s over Kent. RDF gave little advance warning of such attacks, and to counter them, Fighter Command began to fall back into a model of standing patrols. Again, the 2 main British fighters are referred to by name in the memo. Whenever time permits, I wish group controllers to get the readiness squadrons in company over sector aerodromes. Spitfires, 25,000 feet, Hurricanes, 20,000 feet, and wait till they report they are in position before sending them to patrol lines or to intercept raids, having a good track in fairly clear weather. An instruction on the 8th of October really expanded on the new strategy to ensure that Spitfires, at least selected ones from Hornchurch and Biggin Hill, disrupted the Germans' high-altitude escort. When a Spitfire squadron is ordered to readiness patrol on the Maidstone line, its function is to cover the area Biggin Hill, Maidstone, Gravesend, while the other squadrons are gaining their height and protect them from the enemy high fighter screen. The form of attack which should be adopted on the high enemy fighters is to dive repeatedly on them and climb up again each time to regain height. 3. The squadron is not to be ordered to intercept a raid during the early stages of the engagement, but the sector controllers must keep the squadron commander informed as to the height and direction of approaching raids. 4. The object of ordering the squadron to patrol at 15,000 feet while waiting on the patrol line for raids to come inland is to conserve oxygen and keep the pilots at a comfortable height. Pilots must watch this point most carefully so that they have ample in hand when they are subsequently ordered to 30,000 feet, which is to be done immediately enemy raids appear to be about to cross our coast. When other squadrons have gained their height and the course of the engagement is clear, the group controllers will take a suitable opportunity to put this Spitfire squadron onto enemy raids where its height can be used to advantage. Without a doubt, this memo spells out the accepted Battle Britain role of the Spitfire for most of us. Nevertheless, even at this fairly late stage of the battle, the exact methods are still being ironed out. Perhaps the finalised strategy that represents the widely accepted tactic for British fighters came on the 17th of October. On that date, 2 instructions were sent to controllers across the 11 group. The first, number 30, dealt with the growing issue of high fighter raids, and the second, number 31, explained the response to mass bomber attacks on the London area. To combat German daylight raids on the capital, which were becoming less and less frequent towards the end of October, Park laid out his general plan. To engage enemy HIE fighter screen with Spitfire squadrons from Hornchurch and Biggin Hill, halfway between London and the coast, and so enable Hurricane squadrons from North Weald, Kenley and Northolt to attack bomber formations plus close escort before they reach the line of fighter aerodromes east and south of London. The remaining squadrons around London that cannot be got up in time to intercept the first wave to provide a rear screen by climbing over the line of aerodromes east and south of London. The plan to combat fighter bombers was very similar in many ways. Specific Spitfire squadrons would be at readiness in the air to provide protection against the HIE fighter screen. While in place, the rest of the defenders could climb to altitude in relative safety. On the 24th of October, Park remarked on the experience the group had gained in combating the increasingly common high-flying fighter raids. Experience gained during these attacks confirmed that the only sure method of countering a series of raids by bomb-carrying fighters is to keep a pair of Hurricane or a pair of Spitfire squadrons from the same station if possible, continuously on patrol in clear weather, and to relieve them in ample time, keeping them at 15,000 to 18,000 feet until raids appear imminent, when they should be ordered to full operational height. Though less economical in flying hours, this method is far more effective and economical in lives than our long-established method of intercepting from ground level, which was most successful against bomber formations. Those squadrons should be on a common RT frequency whenever possible. What I was wondering is whether or not the effect of these new orders can be found in the data behind the battle. Most importantly, did the loss rate of the defending fighters decrease and the kill rate increase? So I've looked at the data in a few ways, and this is how I've done it. Firstly, I'm interested in the data before Keith Park first mentions using some fighters to specifically tackle the German fighter escort. So that's the 10th of July to the 18th of August. I then wanted to see how the data changes after Park's first memo outlining a clear strategy to tackling the high-flying escorts. That happened on the 11th of September. So the three periods we'll be comparing are the 10th of July to the 11th of August, 30th of August to the 10th of September, and 11th of September to the last official day of the battle, the 31st of October. Why is there a 19-day gap in the data, you may ask yourself?
What the hell is this?
It's simple, because I'm manually inputting RAF claims into a spreadsheet, and those 19 days cover about 51 pages of hundreds of individual entries. I just haven't got round to that part yet. I'm also using other data sources, so I've just picked these dates because it covers everything I've got. Don't worry, we should have enough to go on. So let me give you a bit of an overview of what we're looking at with the data. So we've got three periods, which I'm going to call data range 1, 2 and 3. In terms of operational squadrons for the RAF, we have in the first, well, pretty much over the three periods, we have 18 operational Spitfire squadrons. We've got 33 in the first period, and then 35 operational Hurricane squadrons in the two other periods. You can see the number of sorties carried out, and this is across the RAF. I don't have specific sorties just for 11 group, but just know that the majority of the fighting was done in 11 group. So we have the sorties and the patrols for those three periods. Now if we turn to the claims, so we've taken claims by both the RAF and the Luftwaffe, and we all know that these claims are inflated, but you can see the number of claims made in those periods, and of course the periods are not of equal days, so just bear that in mind. And we've got the losses for the RAF and for the Luftwaffe in the same periods. So this is pretty much what we're looking at overall. So in terms of RAF losses, in terms of fighter pilots, so this is what we have. For the three periods, we have 85 RAF pilots killed in the first date range, 81 in the second, and 131 in the third. But if we break those time periods down, we can see that the average RAF pilots killed per day, 2.58, 6.75, and 2.62. So you might round it up to 3, 7, and 3. This suggests that fewer RAF pilots were being lost per day in our last data range than the second. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean that the fighting was becoming less intense. When you take the 3 date ranges we're investigating as a whole, the loss rate for the RAF and the Luftwaffe trends upwards. If we break this down to a daily average, we get a similar story. Furthermore, this allows us to get a daily average kill ratio as well. This suggests that the RAF's kill ratio fell from 1 to 1.65 down to 1 to 1.05. Then, just as this new policy was introduced by Park, it rose again to 1 to 1.31. At this point, it's worth noting that roughly 90% of destroyed claims occurred within number 11 group's sector of the battle. So what do you think? Does the data show Keith's Park's strategy as a success? If you have some suggestions as to how this analysis could be improved, please let me know, as I'm already thinking of doing a follow-up video when I have more refined data to hand. So what's my conclusion to all this? Well, I would say that although some Spitfires and most Hurricanes were directed against specific targets in 1940, there is a huge caveat to this statement. Yes, Keith Park did instigate this policy to his controllers as far back as the 19th of August 1940. However, it wasn't until mid-October that his instructions were being followed properly. During this delay, many British defenders were being intercepted by German fighters, some never even seeing the bombers. It took a lot of work to get the strategy in place and paying dividends. When fighters from 10 and 12 groups were seconded to 11 group for a particular intercept, no doubt 11 group controllers used them under the same policy. Much less effectively with 12 group formations, however. Ultimately, when this tactic was up and running, the battle was pretty much over. So it won't be wrong of you to share this video with anyone you find parroting the old tenant. Hurricanes went after the bombers and Spitfires won the battle all on their lonesome.